This is your PowerPoint on the PowerPoint quiz for Middle Eastern terrorism. The basics of Islam. Muhammad preached back in about 600 CE about the need for social justice, and this became the cornerstone of the Islamic teachings in the Quran. The Quran had been an attempt to unite the Bedouin tribes in Saudi Arabia around a monotheistic belief. However, at the end of his life, Muhammad made a huge mistake. His largest fault was not providing for a clear line of succession after his death. Once he had died, four great leaders would try to fill the vacuum and make sure that they were the ones to lead Islam. They included Abu Bakr, Uthman, Omar, and Ali. Sunni versus Shi'ite. After Muhammad's death, two sects grew up in order to try to fill in that vacuum that we talked about. They included the Sunni and the Shi'ite sect. The Sunni believed that the next leader of Islam should come from the grassroots. This leader would be charismatic and a virtuous individual. God, or Allah, would rise this individual from the grassroots. On the other side were the Shi'ites. They believed that the next leader would come from the bloodline of Muhammad. Ali, one of those four great leaders, was both the cousin and son-in-law of Muhammad. It was believed amongst the Shi'ites that Ali should be the next leader. But he was assassinated in 661 AD, and that led to a feud that has continued today between the Sunni and the Shiite. The Wahhabis. Tamiya, an Islamic writer in the 14th century, called for a more pure form of Islam. His ideas and writings were eventually picked up in the late 1800s by Abd al-Wahhab, an Islamic writer who believed that the Islamic people of the Ottoman Empire had grown too corrupt. He criticized the use of tobacco, alcohol, and an openness to Greek philosophy in the Ottoman Empire. He started a new tradition called the Tafiri. This allowed for a Muslim to call fellow Muslims an apostate. This would become extremely important for what we see today amongst radical Muslims who call out for jihad, not only against the West, but also against fellow Muslims within the Arab Muslim world. Tafiri allows a Muslim to call another one an apostate or somebody who is not following true Islam. Ibn Saud. Abd al-Wahhab was eventually kicked out of his village, but a leader in Saudi Arabia of the tribes called Ibn Saud took up Wahhab's ideas. He took him in and then formed an alliance with like-minded Muslims. Eventually they began to expand. They attacked Shiites and massacred them in the city of Karbala in Iraq. The Ottomans finally saw the danger that this was posing, and they attacked and massacred the Wahhabis in 1812. The Ottomans were able to end the Wahhabi movement. However, the Ottomans themselves collapsed after World War I. This allowed a new leader, Abd al-Aziz, to pick up the Wahhabi ideas and unite them in the Bedouins under the message of the previous leader Wahhab. He used this in order to unite all of Saudi Arabia. However, he then feared the power of the Wahhabis and actually turned on his own followers and massacred them. But he didn't abandon the message of Wahhabism. Rather, he changed it. He used the message of Wahhabism to control the private lives of people within Saudi Arabia, but he opened Saudi Arabia itself to oil trade with Great Britain and the United States. Gamal Abdel Nasser. In Egypt, a military leader called Gamal Abdel Nasser led a coup against the king of Egypt. He led this coup and then nationalized the Suez Canal, meaning he took it over. The Suez Canal had been built originally by France and then taken over by Great Britain in the late 1800s. Under Gamal Abdel Nasser, there was an attempt to take the Suez Canal back for Egypt. After he was successful in doing so, he called for a pan-Arab movement, including a socialist government, Arab unity, and an eventual destruction of Israel. However, when he almost got into war with Israel, Israel preempted his attack and beat him in a six-day war in 1968. Sayyid Qutb. After the 1968 Six-Day War, Arabs asked why it was that over and over they were losing to Israel and why it seemed that they were losing to the West. Sayyid Qutb observed that there had been changes in Saudi Arabia towards oil markets. Then he observed the defeat of Nasser against Israel. He concluded the problem was with apostate Islam. At one point he came to the United States. He saw here in the U.S. Western liberalism, a culture of what he called sexual promiscuity, alcoholism, and modern values. He concluded that the problem in Arab societies was that Western secular culture had invaded Arab culture and had destroyed Muslim purity. Rise of the Muslim Brotherhood. In 1973, Egypt lost another war against Israel called the Yom Kippur War. 7 years later, in 1980, the leader of Egypt who had fought in that war, Anwar Sadat, decided to make an agreement with Israel to end their problems. They made what's called a bilateral agreement, in which two countries sit down and they make an agreement together, in this case to end the Egyptian invasions of Israel. Muslim nations then decided the best way to try and deal with their problems was rather to do it through economics. They formed OPEC, the Oil Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. This group of countries created higher prices on worldwide oil by deciding to cut back on its production. In response to all these issues, a new group arose called the Muslim Brotherhood. They were formed to pursue a more pure form of Islam. They saw the OPEC moves as just an economic move, not a religious move, and they believed that Anwar Sadat had sold out Islam. They assassinated Anwar Sadat, and they began calling for a more pure form of Islam through a grassroots movement. The Afghanistan War. In 1980, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. This allowed for Muslims, under the term mujahideen, or holy warriors, to fight against what they considered to be the communists and atheists. The United States funded the mujahideen at the time because they were trying to stop the expansion of communism. This did bankrupt the Soviet Union over a decade, but it also led to several different splinter groups within the mujahideen. Osama Bin Laden. One of these splinter groups became a group led by Osama Bin Laden, a leader from the upper class of oil families in Saudi Arabia. He had lost faith in the Saudi Arabian government for its oil corruption, and so he turned to the Sunni Wahhabism of Wahhab and Qutb. He criticized the United States for invading the Holy Lands of Islam in Mecca. Back in 1991, the United States forces had come to Saudi Arabia because they wanted to try to stop Iraq and Saddam Hussein from going into Kuwait. They were allowed to use Mecca for military bases for the fight with Iraq and Kuwait. Osama bin Laden, though, saw this as the infidels coming to the Holy Lands. Remember, Osama bin Laden got his start in the Afghanistan War and had originally been funded by the United States. Now, there is a conspiracy theory out there that the United States actually had Osama bin Laden on the payroll of the CIA. This is not accurate. Actually, what the United States had done was they had funded all the different groups in the Mujahideen in order to fight the Soviet Union. Unfortunately, the disadvantage was that some of this money and some of those material weapons ended up with Osama bin Laden, who at the time was forming his own splinter group, Al-Qaeda. 9/11. Al-Qaeda, formed by Osama bin Laden, or the base, became a new cross-boundary terrorist group. In the past, most terrorist groups had been regional terrorist groups. For example, in the fight between Palestine and Israel, two groups have formed that are regional and deal with Israel alone. One of them is Hezbollah, which is a Shi'ite group in Lebanon, and another is Hamas, which now resides in the Gaza Strip, and it is a Sunni group. What Al-Qaeda attempted to do was to take the same types of religious zealotry, but instead of them being regional and only attacking Israel, Al-Qaeda formed bases or cells that would be all around the world. Bin Laden's strategy was to create these cells of terrorists around the world and make sure that they could attack various centers. Most importantly, their purpose was to attack the economic centers of the United States. Overall, what Osama bin Laden was looking to do was to draw the United States into a fight in the Middle East, like the Soviet Union, in order to bankrupt them, like they had done in the Soviet Union's case. Osama bin Laden hoped that he could bankrupt the United States, limit the United States' influence, and then expand outwards to create a new Islamic caliphate in the middle of the Middle East, possibly reaching all the way out to Southeast Asia.